Today I want to start off just with a little quote from a famous analyst. What I'm covering today is criminal profiling, in this instance FBI criminal profiling. So the first person to be regarded as the first criminal profiler was James A. Staccato. In 1957 he gave a spot-on description of the Mad Bomber, which was in New York City, was like a guy that was bombing the place before, 9/11 and all that stuff, or the Unabomber, if you guys know who that is. This is what he said about the description in general. Look for a heavy man, middle-aged, foreign-born, Roman Catholic, single, lives with brother or sister, and when you find him, chances are he'll be wearing a double-breasted suit. So when they actually use this information for the formal investigation, they ended up finding him. The only key difference was that he was living with two sisters that were, single, because that was the whole description. So that's pretty much what we're getting into today. Today I want to define how he got to this and how today the FBI and most agencies use this to catch, in this instance, serial killers, but we can be using it for homicides as well. Today I want to define the 5 stages an FBI analyst takes in building a homicide criminal profile. The 5 stages are profile input, and which includes a victim profile. Then we have decision process models, which I'll show pretty much an overview of what that is. Crime assessment, criminal profile, investigation, and there is a 6th stage, but it's basically apprehending the person, which I'll get to at the end. So let's begin with the first, which is profile inputs. So a profile input is basically the victim's background, the area's background, the crime scene photos, the crime itself. This includes aerial photos as well. So I don't know if you guys seen Cold Cases, that TV show on A&E. They show all these different pictures. They take all this information, they send it out to the FBI, and this analyst is supposed to make some pattern out of all this inputted information. He's also supposed to be able to see what the risk factors were. So once this happens, another good thing to keep in mind is that an analyst not only has to have the idea of what the crime is and see the pictures, they also have to see the political and the pretty much social environment in which they're analyzing the crime. Those are key factors when you're inputting all this information to building a profile. Kind of sounds like a Facebook, like if you're building a Facebook profile. There's this famous article, well, not a famous article, the man who wrote this article is pretty famous. It's called Inside the Mind of the Mindhunter, interview with John Douglas. He has this in regards to profiling. If you want to understand the criminal, you must look at the crime, because the crime is a reflection of who he really is. This is important, especially if we're going to be analyzing the 5 stages, because you have to be able to just take yourself out of the picture to be a good analyst, and that's important. You don't want to be biased. You don't want to just give false information when you make up this profile. So the next step would be the decision process model, which I'll go ahead and put up here. There you go. There's 7 key points to it, but it's honestly probably the simplest thing once you get into it. So another good thing to keep in mind is that we're not going to go through details of this, but I'll go as quickly as possible through this. The first stage is the primary intent, or the criminal enterprise, which is basically what's before the motive. So sometimes this is something that has to do with emotional sense, as in was this a crime of passion? Was this something that he had harbored deep in his mind? The next step is this key point is selfish. Was this person a selfish person? Is that why he committed this crime? Cause or effect motives, which is basically was this just he needed to do this? it was like a mob enforcer. You know, he just gets paid to do this, and that's pretty much it. The third thing is sexual motives. A lot of these crimes are, especially when it comes to suicide. I mean, serial killers. It's sexually motivated, and it doesn't always mean that they do it for sexual gratification, but it does mean that they get to that point eventually. The fourth is victim risk. So when you have the background and the habits of your victim, you also have to see what got the victim to this point in place. Why were they the victim? Also, which is another key thing to look at, is the offender's risk, which is basically what risk did this person take to commit the crime. Good note would be Ted Bundy. This guy would just, go ahead and pick up hitchhikers in the middle of sorority houses, not sorority houses, like gas stations back in the 70s or late 70s, early 60s, I forget. But he would just do it in broad daylight. So there was a lot of risk factor into, kidnapping and murdering somebody in broad daylight. So that's another thing an analyst takes when, he or she is analyzing a crime. 6 is a good factor. Key point is escalation. What led all this to this point in time for the victim and the offender, which is why did it end up to murder? It's something that analyst has to take a look. And time factor. Again, like I said, Ted Bundy did this in broad daylight. Why did he do it in broad daylight? Why did he basically do this horrible crime in the middle of the day, or why at night? This is very important because you could tell if this person was working, unemployed, or just like doing this out of just sheer randomness, which isn't randomness if you put everything together, but at the end it does come to like who this person was before he became a criminal. The next step, this is the third step, which is basically crime assessment. This, after you get all the inputs together, which is, the victimology, which is, the victim information, the forensic information, photos of the crime scene, the behaviors of the offender, you compile that information together to get a basic behavioral, like his motives and why he's doing what he's doing. Also, you get to see with the crime assessment stage whether this person is organized, disorganized, whether it's staged. A lot of crimes are staged because the offender doesn't want to be, found out as a sexual molester, or he doesn't want to be found out as a murderer, or he wants to do something at one point in time and then take the body somewhere else and just like mess with the police and whatnot. That pretty much covers that. Let me get into the next slide. Next is the criminal profile. So this stage deals with the type of person the FBI analyst will no doubt give the different agencies that require this. And basically this gives the other agencies how to approach the person once they apprehend them and what to ask them. The final stage on all this is putting this together, and basically the investigation stage is when you get all your information that you got from the 7 key points, and then just round them up and give a general description of who you're looking for. Once that's done, you can go ahead and give it to the agency to go ahead and try to apprehend this person. And then once that person is apprehended, which is the final stage, you as an analyst, you have to go ahead and basically do a full review or evaluation of what you got right and what you got wrong. And looks like time is up, but basically, just a quick recap. What I wanted to point out was the 5 stages, which were profile inputs, decision process models, crime assessment, and criminal profile and investigation are all needed to pretty much catch someone that is doing horrific crimes. Thank you.
So Ashley, what did you think?
I really like how much information you tried putting in there, like all together, like giving us the 5 steps that go into trying to catch, you know, who they're looking for. All the information was there. I like the slides that you were trying to show us. I just think maybe it could have been like showed a little bit more into detail.
Yeah.
There was a lot of information that was important to it. Some of them maybe could have been taken out. There were some quotes that I really liked that had it tie it all together. Maybe a little bit more time manageable. The slides are good. And there's a lot of information I wanted to. That was really important. It was just a matter of like trying to get to the key points of it.
Okay. Well, the greeting and the quote at the beginning are fine. The description that Staccato uses of the Mad Bomber, I think, is an interesting example of how profiling is used and how accurate it turned out to be in that particular case. One of the things that I think is missing is connecting some of the technical stuff that you're talking about here to something that people would understand. I mean, you describe a whole bunch of technical, what is he talking about? And I'm thinking, well, you've got 2 cases that you mentioned. You got the Mad Bomber and you got the Ted Bundy case. And you mentioned, for instance, what Bundy picks up women at hitchhiking or gas stations and that sort of thing. So how does a profiler get something from that information? What do they do? How did they use that information to arrive at who it was that they were looking for? That seems to be the thing that I think is kind of missing. You tell us, they're going to do this, and here's this kind of assessment, and there are 6 variations that go on in that particular category. And I'm going, yeah, but what does that all mean? Whereas if you had the example that said, when they were talking about the nature of the crime, that it's largely unplanned and spontaneous, well, that tells us that this person has these kinds of characteristics. That's how the FBI guys knew this about Ted Bundy, or that's how they managed to locate. I'm going, he lives with a sister or brother and wears a double-breasted suit. How the hell does he get that? And I'm going, that's the kind of thing that there's a reason that they got to that, and we're not really seeing that. The visuals, I think, are a little problematic because, first of all, you're not showing them in the slide format. You're not really in the slide presentation format. We're just seeing the working format, so that's a little distracting. But there's so much detail in that first slide. You've got basically a flow chart of these 3 or 4 steps there, and each step has a half dozen or more things that you're talking about. It never matches up to the structure that you've got. It's like you've got a separate structure. And every time you would say something, I kept looking and say, now where is it in the slide that you're talking about this thing? And I could not find it.
Sorry.
Yeah, and so it really feels like what you needed to do was maybe take that material, break it up into separate slides, and then fit it to your structure so that we'd be able to follow it a little bit more. I know you want to kind of keep it in the format that the FBI's got it in their procedure. The problem is we're not taking an FBI, we're not in a class learning to become profilers where we get 6 months where we get to go through this whole process and see how it all works. We got 8 minutes to be introduced to it. So you've got to simplify it, clarify it, and give us examples to illustrate those points. When you were talking to us at the beginning, I thought you did a good job speaking to the audience. Once you get the slides up, you're like we've had a couple of other times, people start talking to the screen, and you break away from the audience a little bit, and you don't want to do that. You want to try and avoid doing that. It's supposed to supplement your presentation. It's not supposed to be where your focus is. Your focus is always you always want it to be on the audience that's listening to you. And you'll see when you watch the video, you start standing sideways even. Earlier in the speech, you're facing us, and then once those things go up on the screen, it's like I'm constantly standing sideways while you're talking about it. Okay, that's fine.